I literally don't get it how these Christians go around talking about how some guy that died 2,000 years ago rose from the dead and is coming back again. Like, how do people buy into those fairy tales? Like, what is wrong with these people? So if you're one of these critics who thinks that Christians are just cuckoo for believing in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then you've clicked on the right video. So in today's video, guys, we're going to look at the historical evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. A lot of people think that the resurrection was a myth, was a fairy tale, a fable, kind of like, the Odyssey or the Iliad, one of those Greek myths. But in today's video, guys, we're going to dive deep into why the resurrection is true, why the resurrection was actually a historical event that changed the course of history for humanity once and for all. I'll be commenting, but also I'll be watching with you a presentation by Frank Turek, who is an amazing apologist and defender of the faith. It's one of the best presentations regarding evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So without further ado, let's dive into this presentation.
Some of you may have heard me tell this true story before, but it bears repeating right now. Let's go all the way back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Monsoor is the United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Monsoor is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position next to him. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Monsoor and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Monsoor in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying on the roof at his feet will surely die. Monsoor yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Monsoor is dead. His two teammates receive only minor injuries because Monsoor's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors at Monsoor's funeral said, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Monsoor's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Monsoor's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Monsoor Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, San Diego, California, North Island to be specific, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Monsoor, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Monsoor's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Monsoor literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Monsoor sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think this story's true. They think it's invented. After all, these are religious people. They embellished this, didn't they? And by the way, it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How can you believe in such a thing like a resurrection? We don't see miracles anymore.
And just to note this idea of like, we don't see miracles anymore, but I think it's actually a lie, because if you just go outside, okay, the fact that the sun rose, the fact that you're breathing, the fact that something has not destroyed this universe, that we've not been hit by something, the fact that all these physical laws work in the universe for our living conditions, the fact that great ships, are able to float on the sea, on the water. You can't walk on the water, but a ship can float on water. These things, that we take for granted are actually great miracles of God that we've become desensitized to, that we've taken for granted. So I just wanted to make that little point about miracles.
Well, I actually think it's really easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions in the affirmative to show that it's true. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament true about the resurrection? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Now,
and by the way, guys, I wanted to mention to you guys this amazing book that I'm about to finish called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. It's actually co-authored with Norman Geisler by Frank Turek as well. So an amazing, amazing book. If you have further questions, or you're a Christian who wants to get a better grip on being able to talk about your faith, this is an excellent, excellent resource.
Now, we don't have time to go through all these, obviously, here tonight. We cover that in the book. But yes, last week we covered a little bit of point 2, and we talked about the moral argument for the existence of God. Tonight, however, I want to jump down here to the final point: is the New Testament true? In fact, in previous years here at Grace, we've gone through some of these other points. But tonight, I just want to point out that the evidence for the New Testament being true is very good, particularly being true about one event from the ancient world. What's that event? The resurrection. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity is true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday. Well, you guys are up at Saturday, it doesn't matter. And do what you want the rest of the week, because if God doesn't exist and Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity's false. So what's the evidence we have that it's really true? What is the evidence that the New Testament writers are telling the truth about this? There are several lines of evidence. In fact, in the book, we have the top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. We're just going to briefly look tonight at 2 of them. The first we're going to look at is something called embarrassing stories. Embarrassing stories. What are embarrassing stories? And why would we talk about embarrassing stories? Well, historians know that if they're investigating a text and there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Now, why would it be true? Because you're never going to invent details or stories that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, right? But you're not going to invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that, right? You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers, this is true of the Old Testament as well, but the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories they never would have invented. That's why we're calling this the duh factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of these. Notice, the New Testament writers depict themselves as dim-witted. I mean, they don't even understand Jesus' mission. You're reading through the Gospels, they're going, we didn't know what Jesus was saying. We didn't know what he was talking about. It's not until he's already resurrected and ascended to heaven do they understand what Jesus really, his mission was. It's only then that they go, wow, I could have had a V8, right? Up to that point, they don't get it. That's embarrassing. Also, their leader, Peter, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Peter or Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. I mean, why is he calling me Satan? I'm the leader here. This is embarrassing. And then Peter says, oh, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was there and I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write something down like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. What do you think? Yep. John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt about it. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never have the women be the first witnesses in that culture? Yes, because a woman's testimony is not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. They never would have invented this. It's embarrassing. In fact, one of the women was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, what a great witness. Yeah, let's put her out there. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in the text. Notice Jesus is called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, there are 2 prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. She's playing a prostitute anyway. Do you think that they invented this? This is embarrassing. This is the Messiah's bloodline. Do you think when Matthew and Luke were recording the genealogies, they went to one another and said, you know what? I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. Rahab. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. They're not making it up. Even though it's embarrassing, they're telling the truth. That's number one. The second reason we know the New Testament writers are telling the truth that we're going to talk about tonight is the fact that they died excruciating deaths. This is actually a painting of Peter being crucified upside down. We don't actually know if he was crucified upside down. We do know he was martyred for his faith. We know that Paul was martyred for his faith. 2 Jameses were martyred for their faith. We know of nobody from the ancient world that ever recanted and said, did it happen? So we've got good evidence they actually died for their faith. Now, it's really important to understand that when you look at the New Testament writers, all of the New Testament writers, with the exception of Luke, all of the New Testament writers were Yahweh-believing Jews who thought they were God's chosen people. They didn't think a man could claim to be God. That would be blasphemy. They didn't think someone would resurrect in the middle of time. They thought someone would all resurrect at the end of time, according to Daniel 12. But they didn't think someone could claim to be God and resurrect in the middle of time. This is completely against their worldview. But somehow, they change their 2,000-plus-year-old religion almost overnight. Why did they do this? Well, let's take a look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Remember, they're all Jews, except for Luke, the writers. Before, They believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs for hundreds of years. And then suddenly Jesus comes along and they say, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because here's the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. All these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb who is now arrived. Before they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they say Christ's life has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before they believe in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, I know you can get the Trinity from the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before they believed in the Sabbath, in fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, the day Jesus rose, and Paul even says in Colossians chapter 2, don't let anyone tell you you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Why would he say such a thing? Because what did the Sabbath represent? The Sabbath represented rest, and the rest has arrived. Jesus is our rest. We rest in his work, not our own. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. Which is the only one not repeated in the New Testament? Keep holy the Sabbath. Before they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, they believed in a sacrificial Messiah. Before they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would cause these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people and didn't think a man could claim to be God, that would be blasphemy, didn't think there'd be a resurrection in the middle of time, but only at the end, what would cause them to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so impactful, so dramatic, that it can turn your worldview around 180 degrees. Some impact events are so dramatic that you'll remember what happened at that event, even if it was 10, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 years ago if you're old enough. You might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, but you'll remember an impact event that occurred that long ago. In fact, let me give you an example of this. There's probably only a few of you in this room that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were on November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand and hold it up high. Ladies and gentlemen, look around these. You see these hands up? These people with their hands up? These people are very old. Okay? November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yes, I'm 60 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 59. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, I'm 2 years old and 2 days. I'm standing in the living room at our home in Wanamassau, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother right now in my mind when she was 26 years old. I can see her sitting there right now. She's 84 today. In fact, I just left her a few hours ago. She lives down in Fort Myers. She's 84. But I can see her when she was 26. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? I was at my home office in Weddington, North Carolina, where I live, and I had the TV on behind me. I had seen the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the phone on the north side of Charlotte, North Carolina. And we were talking about what topic I would speak on when I came to his church. And I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. And we're just talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turn around, look at the TV. The second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no. It was a big plane. It was like a United plane. It was a passenger plane. I said, you saw that? He goes, it was just on live TV. I said, wait a minute. Look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone, and for some reason that morning I had CNN on, and I'm not making this up. But the commentator on CNN said this: one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. You think pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I picked up the phone the next day. I called that pastor back. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam, because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was over 20 years ago, and those of you who are old enough can remember something about that day. But if I ask you where you were 20 days ago, most of you are going to get out your iPhone and go, I don't know, what was I doing that day? I don't know. Why can you remember something from 20 years ago, but not 20 days ago? No impact event 20 days ago, impact event 20 years ago. Do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think if this guy really walked out of the tomb and then taught them for 40 days and did miracles, they would have remembered that? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what he said or what he did or what his mission was if that really happened? No, that's the only way I can figure out why they abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right overnight. In fact, here's what you might want to ask yourself. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they have to gain? What did they get out of this? They got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First we get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question a lot. Maybe you do if you're a Christian. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. They're all in chapter 9 of the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, okay? You can read about them if you want. But you know what is often underneath that question? An illicit assumption. Here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were religious, and we know religious people tend to embellish things. They make things up. You only need to look at the secular sources to figure out what really happened. Well, if you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize how silly that assumption is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose temporally. In fact, you may have heard of my friend J. Warner Wallace. He's a cold case homicide detective. He's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective in the nation because he solves homicides that are decades old. And he's taken his own skill as a homicide detective to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity and several other books. And
it's actually an excellent book. I have that book as well. So that is also a great resource for if you're interested to get to know, was the resurrection true? Is Christianity true? All these questions, regarding apologetics. If you are a true skeptic and you're really on the quest for truth, I think this is also a great, excellent resource, the Cold Case for Christianity.
And he said, whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says there's only one of 3 reasons or a combination of these 3 reasons why that guy's dead. There's not 100 reasons why he's dead, only 3. He says, there was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, power. Those are the 3 motivators that can motivate people to murder. In fact, they're the same 3 motivators that can motivate any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things, but they're so good, sometimes we'll take shortcuts to get them. And so Jim says, if you want to say that the New Testament writers invented the resurrection story, then what you need to figure out is, did they have a sex, money, or power motive? Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got exactly the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he starts becoming a Christian, he's the one persecuted. No, none of the motivators are here for this to be a grand conspiracy. In fact, why would they then die for a known lie? Now you might say, wait a minute, Frank. If you're going to say that martyrdom proves Christianity, don't you have to say that martyrdom proves Islam? No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. Let me just give you one difference for our purposes. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs saw Jesus rise from the dead. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. You see, some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. All right, the next thing I'm going to say is going to sound heretical for just a minute, but it's not. Stick with me. I believe the Bible's inerrant, and if you do, this is going to sound funny, but it's not. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. How can that be? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? How? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus. Then they wrote it down. They didn't write it down, invent it, and then believe it. They witnessed it, and then they wrote it down. In fact, you could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. There would be no New Testament documents written by Jews in the first century if Jesus hadn't risen from the dead. It never would have went anywhere. So you can be confident that Jesus actually rose from the dead.
This is pretty much concludes everything that I wanted to present to you guys regarding the resurrection and evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But his talk is so powerful. And it also reminds me when I was in Rome at the Colosseum, and just standing on the ground where so many Christians died, killed and slaughtered, as martyrs for the Christian faith. They did not recant Jesus. They saw their children die, their wives die. You think these people, this group of people did all of that in the name of a lie? Do you think so? It's interesting how later on Christianity actually became the faith of Rome before it had fully fallen. But, to think that these people were lying, that these people were just deceiving, there's so much evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is only foolishness not to believe in that. In fact, so many people who say that, we can't believe in the New Testament writers, but they do believe, evidence, for instance, for Alexander the Great, who lived 300 years before Jesus Christ, whose accounts first that were only written in the first century. People believe those documents, but they cannot seem to believe the documents and the writers of the New Testament who only wrote the New Testament, like 30 to 40 years after Jesus. It's amazing to me, how people cherry and pick what they consider history or not, I hope this presentation was thought-provoking, was impactful. When I first watched this video, it impacted me so profoundly. I knew about these points, but he presented it so well, and I was just like, wow, this needs to be shared on my channel. Also, I wanted to wish you a blessed Easter this coming Sunday. So if you enjoyed this video, consider commenting, liking this video, sharing this video, and subscribing to my channel for more content. And I'll see you guys in the next video.